The hand connected with her arm, a vice of manicured entitlement. The fabric of her dress, an emerald sheath she had spent 2 weeks of her meager catering salary on, strained at the seam. It was not a dress for violence. It was a dress for pretending, for blending in with the glittering backdrop of the Obsidian Gala, a night celebrating the architectural titans she had once aspired to be, and in a secret, stolen way, already was. "You are not leaving me." Marcus Thorne's voice was a low hiss, a serpent's whisper meant only for her, yet it carried the force of a public decree. His face, usually a mask of relaxed, photogenic charm for the benefit of magazine covers and fawning board members, was tight with a fury that was all too familiar to her. It was the face she saw not in boardrooms, but in the sterile silence of their former home, the one she designed and he inhabited. Dr. Imani Williams did not flinch. She had spent 5 years mastering the art of stillness, of absorbing blows, both physical and psychological, and converting them into a quiet, internal resolve. Her strength was not in resistance, but in endurance. It was a lesson learned through 1,000 small cuts, the casual dismissal of her ideas, the way he presented her blueprints as his own with a charming laugh, the slow, systematic erasure of her name from the story of their shared success. She had finally left him 6 weeks ago, not with a dramatic exit, but with the quiet finality of a tide receding from the shore. She packed one bag, took the master copies of her original design files from their shared server, and walked out of the minimalist glass house she had poured her soul into, a house that had won him the very award being celebrated tonight. Now, she was serving champagne and canapes on a silver tray, the weight of it a grounding reality in the glittering fantasy of the ballroom. Her doctorate in architecture felt like a ghost, a phantom limb tingling with the memory of a life she was supposed to have. She was anonymous here, and that was the point. Anonymity was safety, but Marcus had a predator's nose for weakness, for the one person in a crowd of hundreds he still considered his property. He had cornered her by the sweeping ice sculpture of the new Thorne Tower, the very building that was her magnum opus, his crowning achievement. "Let go of my arm, Marcus," she said. Her voice was low, devoid of the panic that fluttered like a trapped bird against her ribs. She was 3 months pregnant with twins, a fragile, ferocious secret she held cupped in the hollow of her belly, a secret that made his grip not just an indignity, but a physical threat. Her body was no longer just her own. "We need to talk," he bit out, his grip tightening. His eyes, the color of washed-out denim, scanned the crowd, a flicker of paranoia in them. He was not worried about her. He was worried about appearances. This was a performance. His entire life was a performance, and she had gone off script. "We have nothing to talk about," Imani replied, her gaze steady on his. She could feel the delicate bones in her wrist grinding under his pressure. She thought about the twins, no bigger than plums, floating in their quiet, dark world. A wave of protective fury, cold and sharp, cut through her exhaustion. "I said, let go." "You have an obligation," he sneered, pulling her closer. The scent of expensive cologne and entitlement washed over her, a smell she associated with sleepless nights and stolen credit. "To me, to our life. You don't just walk away from this." He gestured vaguely at the opulent ballroom, at the clinking glasses and the murmur of powerful people. He was not talking about their marriage. He was talking about his brand. She was a necessary, if inconvenient, part of it. She did not scream. She did not struggle. To do so would be to give him the scene he both craved and feared. It would validate his narrative that she was hysterical, emotional, unstable. She simply stood, a pillar of quiet defiance in emerald silk, and met his gaze. She was working from a version of herself he had never bothered to update. He thought she was the same woman who would absorb the impact and apologize for being in the way. He was wrong. The ambient sound of the gala, the string quartet, the laughter, the political deal-making disguised as chatter, seemed to warp and bend around their small, violent tableau, A few people nearby glanced over, their curiosity piqued before their good manners or sheer indifference made them look away. No one wanted to get involved, but one person was already involved. Across the ballroom, in a secluded alcove shrouded by velvet curtains, a man sat in a high-backed leather chair. He was not watching the party. He was watching the woman in the emerald dress. He had been watching her for 6 weeks, 3 days, and approximately 4 hours. Kwon Jae-sung did not move. His stillness was a physical presence, a gravitational force in the room. He wore a charcoal suit tailored with the kind of precision that cost more than most cars. His hands rested on the arms of the chair, his posture relaxed but radiating a coiled potential. He was the silent majority investor in half the companies represented in this room, including the one that had just given Marcus Thorne his award. He owned this hall. He owned this night. He watched Marcus's hand on Imani's arm. He saw the faint tremor in her otherwise rigid stance. He saw the subtle shift in her weight, a protective instinct to shield her abdomen. His intelligence was ruthlessly efficient. He knew about the catering job, the small, rented room she lived in, the morning sickness she stoically endured on the bus ride to work. And he knew with absolute certainty about the 2 nascent heartbeats that were the echo of a single, desperate night they had shared a month after she left Marcus. A moment of shared history and unresolved grief that had created a future he was now here to claim. He had not rushed. He was not performing. He was observing, gathering data, and waiting for the precise moment to act. Marcus Thorne had just provided it. Jae-sung raised a single finger. Across the room, his aide, Mr. Choi, a man who existed in a state of perpetual readiness, nodded once and spoke quietly into his wrist. The shift was not loud. It was a change in pressure, in atmosphere. The string quartet did not stop abruptly. They faltered, a single violin screeching off-key before the whole melody dissolved into confused silence. The low hum of conversation guttered like a candle in a breeze. It was the kind of silence that doesn't echo, the kind that settles, heavy and absolute. Every head in the ballroom, as if pulled by an invisible string, turned toward the alcove. Marcus, startled by the sudden quiet, loosened his grip. He looked around, his arrogance momentarily replaced by confusion. He was a performer who had lost his audience. He followed their gaze and saw a figure detaching himself from the shadows of the alcove and beginning to walk toward them. Kwon Jae-sung moved with an unhurried grace that was more intimidating than any overt threat. Each step was deliberate, silent on the marble floor. He was not a large man, but he displaced the air around him, creating a wake of deference. People did not just make way for him, they seemed to flatten themselves against the walls, to shrink, to become invisible. Imani watched him approach, and a feeling she couldn't name, a complex cocktail of terror, relief, and a deep, resonant familiarity, flooded her. It had been 7 years since she had last seen him in person. 7 years since she had made the impossible choice to leave him, to cut herself out of his dangerous, violent world to protect him from the consequences of loving her. And now, that world was walking toward her in a perfectly tailored suit. Jae-sung's eyes, dark and unreadable as polished obsidian, were fixed only on her. He did not acknowledge Marcus. He did not acknowledge the silent, staring crowd. He walked through the sea of power and wealth as if it were nothing more than mist. He stopped a few feet away. His gaze dropped from her face to Marcus's hand, which was still loosely gripping her arm. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. In the profound silence he had created, his words landed with the force of a physical blow. "Take your hand off my wife." The words were declarative, a statement of fact, not a request, not a threat. Marcus stared, his mouth agape. Your wife?" he stammered, a pathetic squeak. He looked from Jae-sung's impassive face to Imani's, his mind refusing to compute the data. "She's my wife. My ex-wife." Jae-sung's expression did not change. It was a landscape of unnerving calm. He gave a nearly imperceptible nod. two men dressed in the same dark, severe suits as Jae-sung materialized on either side of Marcus. They had not been there a second ago. They moved with a fluid, synchronized economy of motion that spoke of years of training. One of them, with a face as blank as a stone tablet, reached out and gently, almost delicately, plucked Marcus's hand from Imani's arm. The other placed a hand on Marcus's shoulder. The pressure must have been immense, because Marcus, a man who prided himself on his physical fitness, buckled slightly at the knees. "I believe you are mistaken," Jae-sung said, his voice still that same, steady, low-volume baritone. It was as steady as iron wrapped in silk. He took another step forward, closing the space between himself and Imani. He reached out, his movements slow, giving her time to react, to pull away. His fingers brushed against the bruised skin of her arm, his touch infinitely gentle. "She has always been my wife." A collective gasp rippled through the room. This was better than gossip. This was a tectonic shift in the city's power dynamics, happening live at the social event of the year. Marcus sputtered, his face turning a blotchy red. "This is insane! Who the hell are you?" Jae-sung finally, for the first time, looked at Marcus. It was not a look of anger or contempt. It was a look of profound disinterest, the way a geologist might glance at a common pebble. "He seems warm," Jae-sung murmured to Imani, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. It was an old joke between them, from another lifetime. "Remove him," Jae-sung said, his gaze returning to the man holding Marcus's shoulder. It was a quiet command, but it held the absolute weight of a royal decree. The men began to walk Marcus away from the center of the room. He struggled, finding his voice again, a voice now pitched with panic and outrage. "You can't do this! Do you know who I am? I just won the Thorn Tower Award. My name is on the building." Jae-sung watched him being escorted toward a side exit, his struggles becoming more frantic. He made a small go-on gesture with his hand. Mr. Choi, who had reappeared at his side, spoke into his phone. "The CEO has certain standards for his award recipients. He removed them, mostly." As Marcus was maneuvered through the door, his final desperate shout echoed back into the stunned silence of the ballroom. "Imani, you owe me!" The door clicked shut. The silence that followed was different. It was no longer heavy, but hollow, filled with 1,000 unasked questions. Jae-sung turned his full attention back to Imani. The rest of the world, with its gawking faces and suspended disbelief, simply ceased to exist for him. His dark eyes searched hers, taking in the faint sheen of sweat on her brow, the exhaustion that clung to her like a shroud, the fierce, protective set of her jaw. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice softer now, the iron beneath the silk receding. She shook her head, a small, jerky movement. Words felt foreign, lodged in her throat. She was caught between two lifetimes, the quiet desperation of her present and the turbulent, passionate memories of her past with this man. The whiplash was nauseating. He saw the silver catering tray still clutched in her other hand, a pathetic shield. With infinite care, he took it from her and placed it on the pedestal of the melting ice sculpture. Her fingers, released from their burden, curled into a fist. "I'm coming," he had told her on the phone a week ago, after his operatives had finally tracked her to the rundown apartment and the catering gig. She had hung up immediately, terrified of what his presence would mean, of the chaos that always followed him. "I told you not to come," she whispered, the words finally breaking free. "I know," he said. He did not apologize. He did not explain. It was simply a fact. She had told him not to come, and he had come anyway. His will was a force of nature. "Your shift is over." He glanced at Mr. Choi. "Compensate the company for the evening, and for the next 5 years, for their trouble." Mr. Choi was already on his phone. "It's handled, Chairman." Chairman. The title hung in the air, answering the question Marcus had screamed. It clarified for anyone in the room who didn't already know that this was not just a wealthy man. This was Kwon Jae-sung, the shadowy sovereign of the criminal underworld and, more recently, a legitimate corporate titan whose company, Golden Phoenix International, had been quietly acquiring vast swathes of the city's commerce. He was a ghost, a myth, a bedtime story whispered by CEOs and politicians, and he had just claimed a caterer as his wife. Jae-sung's hand rested lightly on the small of Imani's back. It was not a gesture of ownership like Marcus's grip had been. It was a gesture of support, a solid, steadying presence. "Let's go." He began to lead her away, not toward the main entrance, but toward the same private exit through which Marcus had been removed. The crowd parted for them like the Red Sea, their faces a mixture of awe, fear, and rabid curiosity. Imani kept her eyes fixed forward, focusing on the back of Jae-sung's charcoal suit jacket. She felt like she was walking on the surface of the moon, her legs disconnected from her body. As they passed the alcove where he had been sitting, she saw a single, untouched glass of water on the table. He had been here the whole time, watching, waiting. The thought was both terrifying and deeply, profoundly comforting. They stepped into a quiet, carpeted service corridor. The silence was a relief after the charged atmosphere of the ballroom. 2 more of his men stood sentinel by the door, their faces impassive. They bowed their heads as Jae-sung and Imani passed. "The car is waiting, Chairman," one of them said. The cool night air hit Imani's face as they stepped outside into a private, walled-off parking area. A sleek black sedan, so dark it seemed to absorb the light around it, idled silently. The engine made no sound. Mr. Choi was already holding the rear door open. Jae-sung helped her inside. The car's interior was a cocoon of soft leather and silence. It smelled of him, a clean, subtle scent of sandalwood and something uniquely his own, a scent that unlocked a 7-year-old memory with painful clarity. He slid in beside her, and the door closed with a solid, satisfying thud, sealing them off from the world. The car pulled away from the curb with a smooth electric hum. They sat in silence for several blocks, the city lights sliding across the tinted windows, painting fleeting patterns on Jae-sung's stone-still face. Imani stared out at the blur of the world going by, her mind a maelstrom. She should be angry. She should be terrified. She had built a life, however small and difficult, on the principle of self-reliance, of being beholden to no one, and in the space of 10 minutes, that life had been obliterated. But beneath the anger and the fear was a current of bone-deep exhaustion and a shameful, overwhelming wave of relief. The weight of constant vigilance, of sleeping with one eye open, of fighting for every scrap of dignity and survival, had been lifted from her shoulders. She didn't know if it had been taken or if she had simply let it drop. "Where are we going?" she asked, her voice sounding steadier than she felt. "Home," he said simply. "I have a home," she countered, the protest weak even to her own ears. A single room with a lumpy mattress and a hot plate was not a home. It was a holding cell. "No," he said, turning to look at her fully for the first time since they had entered the car. His eyes were not cold. They were filled with a deep, aching sorrow, a regret that seemed ancient. "You have a place to stay. It is not the same thing. I failed to provide you with a home 7 years ago. I will not make that mistake again." The bluntness of his admission disarmed her. Their separation had been her choice, a desperate act of love to push him out of the line of fire of a rival organization that had targeted her to get to him. She had vanished, created a new identity, and forced herself to believe he was safer without her. She never considered that he might see it as his failure. "That wasn't your fault, Jae-sung," she said quietly. "I left." "You ran," he corrected her gently, "because I could not guarantee your safety. It is the same thing." "An abdication of my primary responsibility." He reached into the inner pocket of his suit jacket and pulled out not a weapon or a phone, but a small, folded piece of paper. He handed it to her. It was a sonogram picture. 2 tiny, flickering shapes suspended in the darkness. Her breath caught in her throat. She looked from the image to his face, her heart hammering. How? Dr. Helen Cho is a very good physician, he said. Her husband's shipping company is a subsidiary of Golden Phoenix. She is a loyal woman. He paused. She called me the moment she confirmed the second heartbeat. She was concerned about your stress levels and your living situation. Imani's hand went to her stomach. She had been so careful. She had paid in cash. She had used the new name she had created after leaving Marcus, but she had underestimated the length of his reach, the depth of his resources. His power was not hollow or performative like Marcus's. It was a structural, invisible network woven into the very fabric of the city. "They are mine, Imani," he stated, his voice soft but absolute. He was not asking, he was claiming them, claiming her. That night, it was not an accident. She remembered that night with searing clarity. A month after escaping Marcus's gilded cage, she had been at her lowest point, wandering the city in a daze, when she saw him. He was stepping out of a building, surrounded by his usual retinue of silent, watchful men. Their eyes met across the rain-slicked street, and for a moment, 7 years vanished. He had dismissed his men, crossed the street, and said her name. Not the new name she wore like a disguise, but her name, Imani. They had spent one night in a hotel suite that overlooked the entire city, a pocket of stolen time. It wasn't about passion. It was about grief and memory and the magnetic pull of a shared history. They didn't talk about the past or the future. They simply existed together for a few hours, two ghosts finding solace in a familiar haunting. In the morning, she was gone, leaving only a note. "I'm sorry, I can't." She had thought she could disappear again, raise her children in the quiet anonymity she had fought so hard to find. She had wanted to protect them from his world, just as she had tried to protect him. "I don't leave because things become complicated, Jae-sung," she said, her voice thick with unshed tears. "I left you because my presence was a complication you didn't need. It was a danger to you." "You were never a complication," he replied, his gaze intense. "You were the entire point. Your absence was the complication, a problem I have spent 7 years trying to solve." The car slowed and turned, passing through a high, unmarked iron gate that swung open silently for them. They drove down a long, tree-lined driveway toward a skyscraper that pierced the night sky, its top floors illuminated. It was a residential building, but it had the imposing presence of a fortress. "Where are we?" she asked, her voice a whisper. "The Ethelgard, my home." He looked at her. "Our home, if you will have it." The car glided into a private underground garage that was cleaner and better lit than the ballroom they had just left. It was a showroom of immaculate, expensive vehicles, all in shades of black and charcoal gray. Mr. Choi opened her door. Jae-sung led her to a private elevator. There were no buttons. He simply placed his thumb on a small, dark panel and the doors slid open. The interior was paneled in dark wood, the air cool and still. The ride up was silent and impossibly fast. She felt the change in pressure in her ears as they ascended to the top of the city. The elevator doors opened directly into a sprawling penthouse apartment. The first thing Imani saw was the view. An entire wall was made of glass, a panoramic vista of the city's glittering sprawl laid out below them like a carpet of scattered jewels. The space was vast, minimalist, furnished with an impeccable, almost severe taste. It was beautiful, but it felt less like a home and more like the command center of a king. An older woman with kind eyes and silver hair pulled back in an elegant bun was waiting for them. She wore a simple, dark dress and radiated a sense of calm authority that was a softer, maternal echo of Jae-sung's own. She bowed her head to Jae-sung, then turned her warm gaze on Imani. "Welcome," the woman said in Korean, her voice gentle. She then switched to flawless English. "I am Jae-sung's mother. We have been waiting for you." Imani was taken aback. Jae-sung had never spoken of his mother. She had assumed his family was a casualty of the life he had been born into. Jae-sung's mother stepped forward and, to Imani's surprise, took her hands. Her touch was warm and dry. "You look tired, my dear. Let's get you settled. The men can talk about their foolish business later." She cast a fond, slightly exasperated look at her son. Jae-sung inclined his head. "I have a few calls to make." It was an understatement. He was about to declare war, a quiet, corporate, devastatingly effective war. "My mother will see to your needs." "She's already annoyed," his mother said to Imani, a twinkle in her eye. "She gets that from you." Before Imani could process the disarming familiarity of it all, Jae-sung's mother was leading her down a long, wide hallway. The walls were lined with art, but it was not the cold, abstract stuff of corporate lobbies. They were vibrant, expressive paintings, full of color and life. "Jae-sung has been collecting your favorite artists for years," his mother commented, noticing her gaze. "He said they reminded him of your smile." The comment was so simple, so intimate, it made Imani's chest ache. They entered a suite of rooms that was larger than her entire apartment building. There was a sitting room, a massive bedroom with another stunning view, and a bathroom that looked like a private spa. But it was the room off to the side that made her stop in her tracks. It was an architect's studio. A top-of-the-line drafting table stood by the window, angled to catch the morning light. The walls were lined with shelves, empty for now, but waiting. A powerful computer with multiple monitors sat on a sleek desk. It was a perfect professional workspace, a shrine to a part of herself she thought she had lost forever. "He had this prepared for you 3 years ago," his mother said softly, standing beside her. "He never lost faith that you would come home." Imani walked over to the drafting table and ran her hand over the smooth, clean surface. The sheer, unadulterated belief this room represented was more overwhelming than the threats, the wealth, or the power. Marcus had taken her work and called it his. Jae-sung had built her a temple and waited for her to arrive. "I need a shower," Imani said, her voice thick. "Of course, child." Jae-sung's mother gestured to the closet. "There are clothes. We were not sure of your size, so there is a selection. A tailor will come in the morning." Left alone, Imani sank onto the edge of the enormous bed. The mattress was firm but yielding. She felt the deep, cellular exhaustion of the last few years, the last few weeks, the last few hours, settle over her. She was in the heart of the lion's den, a gilded cage far more luxurious than the one she had just escaped. But as she sat there, listening to the profound, insulated silence of the penthouse, she felt a sensation she hadn't experienced in years. Safety. It was a disorienting feeling, and she was not yet sure she could trust it. But for the first time in a very long time, she felt she could close both her eyes when she went to sleep. Meanwhile, in his own office at the other end of the penthouse, Jae-sung sat behind a desk carved from a single piece of black marble. The city lights glittered behind him. Mr. Choi stood silently before him, holding a tablet. "Marcus Thorne," Jae-sung said, the name tasting like ash in his mouth. "Give me the file." Mr. Choi swiped the screen. "Thorne Architectural Group, publicly traded, market cap $1.2 billion, heavily leveraged for the new Dubai project. Their primary lender is Sterling Financial." "I own Sterling Financial," Jae-sung said. It was not a boast. It was an inventory check. "Yes, Chairman, through 3 shell corporations. They are unaware of the ultimate ownership." "Call in the debt," Jae-sung said quietly. "All of it. Cite a violation of the ethics clause in the loan agreement. I'm sure you can find one. His public assault on a member of the catering staff should suffice." Mr. Choi's fingers flew across the tablet. "It will trigger a catastrophic stock devaluation and likely force them into bankruptcy protection within 48 hours. "Good. What about his personal assets?" "The glass house, as you know, is legally in Dr. Williams's name. A prenuptial agreement he forced on her to protect his supposed assets. Ironic. His stock portfolio will be worthless by morning. His credit lines are with 3 major banks, all of which have outstanding security contracts with Golden Phoenix," Jae-sung finished. "Cancel them, effective immediately. He will be financially neutered by sunrise, Chairman." "And his career?" The board of Thorn Architectural Group is convening an emergency meeting. I have already spoken with two of the members, Mr. Ishida and Madame Dubois. They are receptive to a change in leadership and a review of the provenance of the company's most successful designs. Jae-sung leaned back in his chair, his fingers forming a steeple. He was dismantling a man's life with the calm precision of a surgeon removing a tumor. It was not about revenge. Revenge was a hot, messy emotion. This was about sanitation. It was about removing a contaminant from Imani's life. It was about correcting a cosmic error. And the award? The Obsidian Gala Committee is already in damage control. The footage from the ballroom's security cameras, our cameras, is quite clear. They will be issuing a retraction and an apology, and they will be launching an investigation into the true architect of the Thorn Tower. Mr. Choi allowed himself a small, thin smile. I have already provided them with the original digital blueprints, time-stamped and encrypted from the files Dr. Williams brought with her when she left. Jae-sung nodded slowly. Ensure that Marcus Thorn is not informed of the source of his misfortune. Let him believe it is the random cruelty of the market. Let him panic. Let him flail. Arrogant men are predictable in their desperation. He will make a mistake. A final one. Yes, Chairman. That is all, Mr. Choi. The aide bowed and retreated as silently as he had appeared. Jae-sung swiveled his chair to face the window, looking out over his city. He was moving mountains, toppling empires, all with a few quiet words. It was the only language he knew, the only way he knew how to protect the woman sleeping in the next room. He was building a fortress of security around her, brick by silent, ruthless brick. He only hoped that when she woke up, she wouldn't feel like a prisoner within its walls. The next few weeks passed in a strange, suspended reality for Imani. She woke up to the soft light of dawn filtering through the panoramic windows. She ate meals prepared by a private chef, food that was both delicious and perfectly tailored to her nutritional needs. A team of the best doctors, led by the discreet Dr. Cho, visited the penthouse for her prenatal checkups. She did not have to take a bus, wait in a clinic, or worry about the cost. She spent her days in the studio Jae-sung had built for her. At first, she hesitated, circling the drafting table and the powerful computer as if they were wild animals. It felt like a betrayal of her hard-won independence to simply accept this gift, but the pull of the work was too strong. It was a part of her soul she had starved for too long. She started by sketching, small things, ideas for furniture, a park bench, a fountain. Then, tentatively, she opened the files of her old projects, the ones she had taken from Marcus. She began to refine them, to correct the small, soulless changes he had made. She worked for hours, losing herself in the clean lines and complex calculations, the familiar comfort of creation. Jae-sung was a quiet presence. He would leave for hours at a time, conducting his silent war from his downtown headquarters, but he was always there in the evenings. They would eat dinner together, often in a comfortable silence, on the terrace overlooking the city. He never pushed her to talk about the past. He asked about her day, about the babies, about the designs she was working on. He would listen with an unnerving focus, his dark eyes missing nothing. He would often come into her studio late at night, finding her still at the drafting table. He would not speak, just place a cup of herbal tea beside her and stand by the window, watching the city below, a silent guardian in her creative space. It was in these quiet moments that their relationship began to knit itself back together. It was a different fabric now, not the frantic, passionate connection of their youth, but something stronger, quieter, woven with threads of shared history, mutual respect, and a profound, unspoken understanding. He saw her, truly saw her, not as a possession or an accessory, but as an equal, a master of her own craft. One evening, he brought a tablet into her studio. He didn't say a word, just placed it on her desk. The screen showed a news report. The headline read, "Marcus Thorn files for bankruptcy. Ousted from namesake firm amid plagiarism scandal." She read the article, her face impassive. It detailed the catastrophic collapse of his company, the retraction of his awards, the pending lawsuits from shareholders. It mentioned an anonymous source providing irrefutable proof that the designs for his most famous buildings, including the Thorn Tower, were the work of his estranged ex-wife, Dr. Imani Williams, who had been unreachable for comment. She looked up at Jae-sung. "Was this you?" "I corrected a data entry error," he said, his voice flat. It was the corporate metaphor for annihilation. She felt a cold, cathartic satisfaction, but it was muted, distant. His ruin didn't bring her joy. It was simply the final, logical outcome of his own actions, the closing of a painful chapter. "Thank you," she said, and she meant it. Not for his destruction, but for her vindication. "Your name will be on the building by the end of the month," he stated. "They are renaming it the Williams Spire." Imani looked away, toward the window. The city lights seemed brighter tonight. She had never wanted revenge. She had only ever wanted credit for her work. She had wanted her name back, and he had given it to her. Her hand went to her belly, where a definite curve was now visible beneath her loose-fitting clothes. "They're kicking," she said softly. Jae-sung came to stand beside her, his gaze soft. He hesitated for a moment, then slowly reached out his hand, not touching, but hovering just above her stomach. "May I?" She nodded, and he gently placed his palm against her belly. His hand was warm and steady. A moment later, a tiny, fluttering kick met his palm. A look of pure, unguarded wonder transformed his face, erasing the years of steel and shadow. In that moment, he was not Chairman Kwan, the sovereign of the underworld. He was just a man feeling his child move for the first time. It was then that Imani knew she was home. Marcus Thorne was not a man accustomed to powerlessness. His entire identity was built on a foundation of control, influence, and the admiration of others. The last month had shattered that foundation into dust. His credit cards were declined. His bank accounts were frozen. His phone calls to former colleagues went unanswered. He was evicted from his penthouse apartment at a luxury hotel, his belongings unceremoniously dumped on the sidewalk. He was a pariah. The articles detailing his professional disgrace and the accusations of plagiarism were everywhere. He was living in a cheap motel by the airport, the smell of stale smoke and despair clinging to the thin curtains. He spent his days obsessively scrolling through the news on a cheap, prepaid phone, his fury and confusion curdling into a toxic obsession. He did not understand what had happened. In his arrogance, he could not conceive of a force so powerful and so silent that it could dismantle his entire world overnight. He did not connect the quiet, imposing Asian man at the gala to this financial apocalypse. He was, in his mind, the victim of a corporate backstabbing and a vindictive ex-wife. He was working from a version of reality that had never been accurate. He blamed Imani. It was all her fault. She had left him, humiliated him, and then, somehow, conspired to ruin him. He fixated on her with the single-minded intensity of a ruined man with nothing left to lose. He hired a cheap, disreputable private investigator to find her. The investigator was incompetent, but lucky. He tailed one of Jae-sung's mother's cars from a charity luncheon and tracked it back to the Ethelgard. He reported to Marcus that Imani was living in the penthouse of the city's most exclusive and secure residential building, the guest of the infamous and reclusive billionaire Kwon Jae-sung. The name finally clicked in Marcus's fevered brain. The man at the gala. My wife? It was not some random new boyfriend. It was the ghost who haunted the city's boardrooms. But Marcus's arrogance was a terminal disease. He did not feel fear. He felt rage. He felt jealousy. In his mind, Imani had simply traded up. She had found a richer, more powerful man to latch onto. He saw it as the ultimate betrayal. He convinced himself that she was being held there against her will, a prisoner in a gilded cage, and that he, Marcus, was the one who could save her. Or, failing that, he could expose the whole sordid affair and bring them all down with him. His final, fatal miscalculation came in the form of a cream-colored embossed invitation. It was for the annual St. Jude's Children's Hospital benefit, the most exclusive philanthropic event of the year. The host of the event was none other than Jae Sung's mother. An administrative error, a relic from his past life of influence, had sent the invitation to his old office, and a sympathetic former secretary had forwarded it to his motel. To Marcus, it felt like fate. It was his chance to confront them, to expose them in front of the city's true elite. He sold his last remaining asset, a vintage watch his father had given him, to rent a tuxedo and buy a forged press pass. He had a plan. It was a stupid, desperate plan born of delusion and rage, and it was exactly what Jae Sung had been waiting for. The ballroom of the Grand Imperial Hotel was even more opulent than the one at the Obsidian Gala. The air hummed with the quiet confidence of old money and established power. Imani stood beside Jae Sung's mother near the grand staircase, greeting guests. She wore a custom-made gown of deep sapphire blue, its elegant draping accommodating her now prominent 5-month pregnancy. Her hair was swept up, showcasing a simple diamond necklace that had been a gift from Jae Sung's mother. She looked serene, radiant, and untouchable. She was no longer a ghost in the machine. She was a guest of honor, introduced to everyone as the brilliant architect of the new Williams Spire. The vindication was quiet, constant, and deeply healing. Jae Sung stood a few feet away, speaking with the mayor. He looked relaxed, but his attention was, as always, divided. One part was on the conversation. The other was a protective perimeter around Imani. His men were everywhere, disguised as waiters, security, and guests. They knew Marcus was coming. The forged press pass had been flagged the moment it was procured. The trap was set. Marcus slipped in through a service entrance, his heart pounding with a mixture of fear and righteous fury. He saw Imani immediately, standing in the light, looking like a queen. The sight of her so calm and beautiful, and the visible swell of her stomach sent a fresh wave of rage through him. She was pregnant, and she was glowing. He had given her everything, and she had thrown it all away to have another man's child. The injustice of it, in his warped perception, was staggering. He began to push his way through the crowd, his movements clumsy and jarring in the graceful assembly. People turned to stare at his disheveled appearance, the manic gleam in his eyes. He broke through the last line of guests and stood before Imani, his chest heaving. "Imani!" She looked at him, and her serene expression didn't falter, but a cool, watchful stillness came over her. She was not afraid, not anymore. She simply stepped back half a pace, placing a protective hand over her belly. Jae Sung's mother placed a steadying hand on her arm. "Marcus," Imani said, her voice even, "you are not welcome here." "Not welcome?" He laughed, a ragged, ugly sound. "I'm here to save you, can't you see? He has you trapped here. This gangster." He gestured wildly at Jae Sung, who was now walking calmly toward them, the mayor forgotten. "You need to leave," Imani said, her voice dropping, taking on a hard, diamond edge he had never heard before. "I'm not leaving without you," he shouted, his voice cracking. He took a step forward, his hand outstretched, reaching for her. "You are my wife. You have an obligation to me. Everything you have, you owe to me." Before his fingers could even brush the fabric of her dress, Jae Sung's hand clamped down on his wrist. It was not a violent motion, but the pressure was absolute, a grip of immovable steel. Marcus cried out in pain, his knees buckling. "I believe," Jae Sung said, his voice a low, dangerous hum, "we have already had this conversation." He twisted Marcus's arm behind his back with an effortless, practiced motion, pushing him down to his knees. The entire ballroom had fallen silent, all eyes on the drama unfolding at the foot of the stairs. "You are a guest here, Marcus," Jae Sung said, his voice dangerously soft as he leaned down. "And you are making a scene." He let go, and Marcus crumpled to the floor, clutching his wrist. "He ruined me!" Marcus sobbed, pointing a trembling finger at Jae Sung. "He took everything." Jae-sung looked down at the pathetic, broken man on the floor. He felt nothing, no pity, no anger, only the quiet satisfaction of a problem reaching its conclusion. He took out his phone. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. In the tomb-like silence of the grand ballroom, his quiet monologue was a death sentence. "You seem to be operating under a misconception, Marcus," Jae-sung began, his tone conversational. "I didn't take anything from you. You simply defaulted on your obligations." He swiped the screen of his phone and turned it for Marcus to see. It showed the logo of Sterling Financial. "This was your lender. It is my company. You violated your ethics clause. A regrettable but necessary business decision." He swiped again. The logo of Thorn Architectural Group appeared. "This was your company. The board, concerned about your erratic behavior and the mounting evidence of intellectual property theft, voted for your removal. They have since entered into a partnership with my firm, Golden Phoenix, to ensure their stability. Another regrettable but necessary business decision." He put the phone away and crouched down, bringing his face level with Marcus's. "You speak of obligation," Jae-sung continued, his voice dropping to a whisper that was somehow more menacing than any shout. "Let me tell you about obligation. You had an obligation to the brilliant woman who gave you a career, who designed your legacy while you took the credit. You had an obligation to treat her with respect, not as a possession. You failed." He stood up, brushing a non-existent piece of dust from his tuxedo. "You were never in her league. You were a parasite, and the host has finally been cleansed. Your life is not ruined. It has simply been returned to its factory settings. Worthless." The finality of the words, the cold, brutal truth of them, finally broke through Marcus's wall of delusion. He stared up at Jae-sung, then at Imani, who stood watching him with a look not of hatred, but of distant clinical pity. The whole edifice of his life, his lies, his stolen glory, crumbled to dust in that single, horrifying moment of clarity. A sound tore from his throat, a raw animal wail of utter despair. He collapsed completely, curling into a fetal position on the pristine marble floor, sobbing uncontrollably. Jae-sung gave a small nod. Two of his men, who had been waiting patiently, moved in. They lifted the weeping, broken man from the floor as if he weighed nothing and carried him away, his sobs echoing through the silent, stunned hall. Jae-sung turned back to the crowd. His face was impassive. He walked to the small stage where a microphone stood waiting. He tapped it once. "My apologies for the interruption," he said, his voice calm and steady, washing over the room and restoring a semblance of order. "The auction will begin in 5 minutes. But first—" He paused and looked directly at Imani, his eyes softening. He held out his hand. "I would like to introduce someone." Imani hesitated for a fraction of a second, then took a deep breath and walked toward him. She placed her hand in his, and he led her onto the stage. He stood beside her, his presence a solid, unwavering shield. "Many of you know of the recent changes at the Thorn Group," he said. "Tonight, I want to end the speculation and correct the record. For the last 5 years, the most innovative and celebrated designs to come out of that firm were the work of one person. She has been the most capable person in every room she has ever entered, and her name has been inexcusably absent from her own legacy for far too long." He turned to her, his voice full of a pride and reverence that resonated through the entire room. "I would like to introduce the lead architect of the newly christened Williams Spire, a visionary artist and the mother of my children, my wife, Dr. Imani Williams." He began to applaud, a slow, steady clap. For a moment, the room was silent, and then, starting with the mayor and Jae-sung's mother, a wave of applause erupted, washing over Imani. It was not applause for a victim. It was not for a gangster's moll. It was for her work, for her name. Tears welled in her eyes, but for the first time in her life, they were not tears of pain or frustration. They were tears of relief. The weight she had carried for so long, the crushing burden of being unseen and uncredited, finally, completely, lifted. She smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes and lit up her face, and the applause grew louder. Later that night, they stood on the terrace of the penthouse. The city glittered below, a silent, sprawling kingdom. The cool night air felt clean. Imani leaned her head against Jae-sung's shoulder, her hand resting on her belly. She was no longer wearing the sapphire gown, but a soft, comfortable cashmere robe. "I saw his face," she said quietly. "When he understood. It wasn't triumph I felt. It was just quiet." "Peace is often quiet," Jae-sung replied, his arm wrapped securely around her. "It is the absence of noise." She thought about that. Her life with Marcus had been full of noise. The noise of his demands, his insecurities, his performative success. Her life alone had been the noise of survival, the constant hum of anxiety. This, here with Jae-sung, was the first true silence she had known. The kind of silence that doesn't echo, the kind that settles. She turned in his arms to face him, her expression serious. "What you did tonight, it wasn't for me, was it? Not just for me." He looked down at her, his gaze unwavering. "No," he admitted, "it was for them." He placed his hand over hers on her stomach. "I will not have my children born into a world where their mother's name is a footnote in another man's story. They will be born into a world that knows exactly who you are." The raw, fierce protectiveness in his voice resonated deep within her. It was the same instinct she felt for the lives inside her. It was the foundation of a family. "I have something for you," he said, reaching into his pocket. It was not a sonogram this time. It was a small velvet box. He opened it. Inside, nestled on a bed of black silk, was a ring. It was not a large, ostentatious diamond. It was a simple, elegant platinum band, engraved on the inside with a pattern of interlocking phoenix feathers. And beside it was another identical ring. "You said I was your wife," she murmured, looking at the rings. "In my country, in my heart, you never stopped being my wife," he said. "But we live in this world now, and I want this world to know. I want you to have my name, legally, finally. And I want to have yours." He took out the larger of the two rings. "Will you marry me, Imani? Again, for the first time in this life?" She looked from his earnest, open face to the rings, and then out at the city. She had fought so hard for her independence, for her own name, and here he was, offering not to take it, but to share it, to protect it, to bind it with his own. This was not a surrender. It was an alliance, a partnership of equals. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Jae-sung, I will." He slid the ring onto her finger. It was a perfect fit. She then took the other ring and slid it onto his. His hand, the hand that could command armies and topple empires, trembled slightly as she did so. He did not kiss her with fiery passion. He simply rested his forehead against hers, their shared breath mingling in the cool night air. It was a moment of profound, quiet rightness, a feeling of finally being correctly placed in the universe. The future was not a fairy tale. It would be complicated. His world was still a dangerous one, and their children would be born into a legacy of power and shadow. But as she stood there, safe in his arms, feeling the steady beat of his heart against her own and the flutter of new life within her, Imani knew she would not be facing it alone. Some people will take your silence for weakness, your grace for submission. They will try to write your story for you, casting you as a footnote in their own bloated narrative. But true strength is not loud. True power doesn't need to perform. It endures, it builds, it protects, and in the end, it doesn't need to shout to be heard. It simply is. The story of Dr. Imani Williams was just beginning, and this time she would be the one holding the pen.